For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. Award-winning documentary filmmaker Toni Strasburg joins me to discuss her memoir, Fractured Lives, which details her experience of the wars in Southern Africa during the 1980s and 1990s. Welcome, Toni.
Thank you.
Now, what specifically about filmmaking and documentary making in Southern Africa during the war years fascinated you, and why did you choose this path?
Well, I'll start with the end. I like telling stories, and I have a very visual mind, so I tell stories visually, so therefore documentary filmmaking. Why Southern Africa and why the war zones, which was some time ago now? I didn't only work in Southern Africa, I must say. First of all, I made films in many places. That particular time and this particular region is because I am South African by birth. I was living in exile. I come from a very political family. My father, Rusty Bernstein, was in the Rivonia trial. My mother was a famous ANC activist as well, and a writer and artist, I may say. And so I come from that kind of background, and this was my place, and this was my struggle. But I couldn't come to South Africa in those years at all. But I could come to Southern Africa, and what South Africa was doing was conducting a war in what was known then as the frontline states, which was very little known, not only inside South Africa itself, but in the rest of the world, because although South Africa and apartheid were very much in the media, Mozambique and Angola and all that sort of thing wasn't. So it was my contribution, if you like,
and I suppose
and my passion.
And I suppose the impact also of what was happening in South Africa that filtered through to the rest of those countries.
Oh, absolutely. It was South Africa's war in that region that was causing such havoc.
Now, right at the beginning of your story, you describe how telling the story about the wars didn't bring any change and that it didn't make any difference. Do you still see it like that?
I don't think I said it quite like that, but what I did say was that in the beginning, I really thought that it would be earth-shattering, that it would really change public opinion, if you like. And I soon realised, or I came to realise, that actually all I could really do was bear witness. But I do see that as very important. Somebody has to bear witness, some bodies have to bear witness, and there has to be a legacy of what happened left for people to know about and to learn from.
Did it not affect you? Like mentally?
Yes, I think about that quite a bit. You know, when you're actually out there on the road making films, there may be horrifying things happening in front of you, but you're so concerned with the practicalities of what you're doing. You know, will the cameraman do what you want? Is somebody sick and are they going to hold up? Are you going to be hurried out of this place and not get the story? That the impact comes much later, I think. And for me, the editing process was often much more traumatic when I was watching the footage, my footage, over and over again, that it really came home to me.
And then you could get an idea of how other people might react to it.
Yes, I had arguments about that with TV stations in the UK, with broadcasters in the UK, about you can't show that, it's too horrifying. And I was going, but war is horrifying, exactly. But you don't want to turn viewers off. So there is a bit of a fine line there, yes.
Now, what were the main challenges you faced in the male world of documentary filmmaking? And how do you think your approach differed to the men's approach in your field?
Well, I will say that it is still very much a male-dominated industry. Not totally, but still very much so. And was more so then. Obviously, we're talking some decades back now. But that's a side of things I don't really want to get into because it's the usual, you know, sort of gender issues that we all know about, if you like. My approach was different because I'm not interested in, as so many men filmmakers are, in reportage or the mechanics of war, the guns and the soldiers and the armies and the fighting and so on. I'm more interested in the effects of war on populations, and in particular women and children. And so I think that was very much a different, somewhat of a different approach. I'm not saying that, you know, all men are this and all women are that. But also, I think in the book, I try and show that I was a vulnerable person too, and that you know, I often had issues with my crews, perhaps. I'm the female and was normally an all-male crew, not always, but especially in the beginning. And being forceful and in control when you don't always know what you're doing or the situations get out of control. So I try to give it that perspective. So I hope that it's a book that gives you some idea of how it feels as well as just bang bang stuff.
Must have been quite stressful at times.
It was very stressful, and so I used to keep a journal when I was shooting, in which I think was a sort of safety valve, which I would moan about how everybody had been horrible to me and they'd made me cry, or I didn't know what I was doing, or, you know, the story was out of control. But I also, you know, did document going back to places and what it was like. But yes, it was, I think I got rid of my stresses by sitting in my room and scribbling.
And this was the result.
And this was the result.
It's not a bad idea. What was the most memorable documentary you ever filmed?
I think two, because they go together. It was Chain of Tears, which was about the effects of war on children in the Southern African region, mainly Mozambique, Angola, and a little bit South Africa. I sent a crew in here at the time. And I was looking at both the physical and the mental aspects of trauma. And I followed that up about 7 years later with Chain of Hope, trying to find the same children 7 years on and see what had happened to them. So to me, those were probably out of all my films, the most, if you like, the most important and the most affecting.
And was there hope at the end of that chain?
Yes, there was. Surprisingly, much more than you think. With very little intervention, children who have been mentally terribly traumatized can recover to a certain extent. And I found most of my children, most of them.
Now finally, I read on your website that after several jobs you reinvented yourself as a documentary filmmaker. What's the story behind that?
Well, you see, I've reinvented myself several times. I started off by leaving school and wanting to be a nurse. And indeed, I started out at Grooterskuur in so long ago that, you know, you weren't even thought of, and didn't last very long, I may say. I became a nursery school teacher, and then when we went to England in the mid-60s, I went to university there and studied sociology and psychology and worked in research projects with one was a twin study and one was children with behavioural problems. And then I reinvented myself as a filmmaker. Well, now I've reinvented myself as something else. So, you know, life goes on.
Thank you so much. It's so inspirational. I wish you all the best.
Well, thank you very much.
That was Toni Strasburg, an award-winning documentary filmmaker discussing her memoir, Fractured Lives.